The W is still a little bit behind. Like I said, we didn't even have player props in general 2 years ago. So we're in a growth period. But I think what a lot of people who've been betting the W for a while have been seeing is there's now way more eyeballs. There's way more money in it, which means, the lines are harder to beat when there's more money. So we're seeing a lot more people in the space, but not as many bets. So it's tough to bet the W. For a while, it was, it was pretty easy. It didn't seem like all that many people were here. It was kind of, hanging out and being able to make a nice little bit of money based on the fact that you just followed the league. That's all you had to do. Now you really got to get in the weeds. So it's been challenging, but a fun process of trying to, stay one step ahead of the curve with all the extra eyeballs on the W this season.
And one thing we haven't delved in with the W that my other co-hosts are interested in is betting. We've done some betting stuff with the NBA, but not the WNBA. So just for our audience that's not familiar with this betting on the WNBA, can you kind of give a quick synopsis of what separates betting in the W compared to just other sports, not even just the NBA, but just other leagues in general?
Yeah, for sure. The betting the WNBA is in a really interesting spot. So you kind of mentioned some of the stuff I do at the top there. Host a podcast, Buckets WNBA. It's kind of the sister show to Buckets NBA that's under Action, and it's all relatively new. We had the show a couple years ago, and we were really only able to bet sides in total. So for people who don't follow betting, what that means is basically we would get the Seattle Storm at the Minnesota Lynx. The books would create a number. It was usually very easy to beat because there were not that many eyeballs on it either. It wasn't on SportsCenter all the time, and it wasn't, people weren't putting their money on it night to night betting the league. As the sport has grown, the last couple of years has seen exponential growth. Caitlin Clark always gets the credit, but there's been a lot of factors that have gone into the growth of this league. It was really kind of on an upward trajectory, even before Caitlin kind of drew some more eyeballs. She definitely has done great, but the league has really popped in the last couple of years. And what that has meant is there's now a lot more that you can bet on the WNBA, which is awesome. You can bet on player props. That's one that people always hear about, right? The same game parlays and the player props. If you aren't a big into the betting, you probably have even heard of those. Basically, all that's saying is you're saying, I think Nafisa Collier will have at least 15 points, and you bet $50 to win $30, or you bet $5 to win $3, something like that. And that has been interesting this year because they are offering some more things, but they definitely don't offer as much as kind of the bigger leagues. Like NBA, you can bet on the 10th player in the rotation. You can bet on their rebounds. You can bet on almost anything. It's pretty crazy, all the stuff you can bet on. The W is still a little bit behind. Like I said, we didn't even have player props in general 2 years ago. So we're in a growth period, but I think what a lot of people who've been betting the W for a while have been seeing is there's now way more eyeballs. There's way more money in it, which means, the lines are harder to beat when there's more money. So we're seeing a lot more people in the space, but not as many bets. So it's tough to bet the W. For a while, it was, it was pretty easy. It didn't seem like all that many people were here. It was kind of, hanging out and being able to make a nice little bit of money based on the fact that you just followed the league. That's all you had to do. Now you really got to get in the weeds. So it's been challenging, but a fun process of trying to, stay one step ahead of the curve with all the extra eyeballs on the W this season.
Just because, I feel like the game hasn't changed, but yet you said that because of the interest, it's harder to bet. So I'm a novice when it comes to sports betting. I find the industry fairly interesting, even though I would probably never participate in it, but I just find the industry, just everything that comes out of it, truly fascinating. So could you delve into why that is now, that it's a harder league to bet on, even though what I'm seeing is it's the same game. So I'm just very curious, why do you think it's harder now with the increased popularity?
Yeah, so some of it's just attention. So when the sport was a little bit more, niche, if you will, I think that's a word that's often thrown around with the W. I got into the league around, 2014, 2015, that kind of era, and there weren't that many people following it. So the sports books would still put out, like I said, they'd put out the Minnesota spread or something like that you could bet. And because there weren't that many eyeballs on it, when they move the lines, it has to do with if they're getting a lot of money on something. The more money that comes in, and usually the money isn't dumb money. There's usually not people that are, putting tens of thousands of dollars unless they really know what they're talking about. So if that money comes in, it usually is, I think I'm pretty good. I think I'm going to be able to make money in the long run. So you, instead of going against the people who back in the day, 4 or 5 years ago, were just like, oh, I'm a WNBA fan. I'm not really, paying super close attention. I've heard of this sports betting. I'll put $20 on Minnesota. Now it's like people who are really locked in, really doing this because they think they can make money and have been able to in the past, betting, different sports. I think a lot of people translated over from the NBA of saying, okay, I bet the NBA and I have success there. Let me look at the WNBA because now I've got a full year of betting. If you're only an NBA bettor, it'd only go from October to June, July kind of area. Now you've got the whole year covered of potentially being able to make money if you're good enough to do it. I'll say if we have people listening that are, not in the betting space, it's very challenging. Don't go into betting thinking you're going to make money. What I always tell people is, bet the amount that you'd be like, oh, that's what I would spend if I went to a game and got a hot dog and a beer or something. That is how you should think of it. You should think of it as, I put $20, I put $10, I put $2, whatever the amount is that you're comfortable being. That was just to enjoy the game with a little, extra something to root for. Be it, I bet on Sabrina Ionescu to score 20 points. I bet John Paul Jones to get a double-double. I bet the Lynx to win, whatever it may be, unless you're really, really if you're listening to this and you're like a quant trader on Wall Street or something, you have the skills that kind of can translate over, come on over. That you might actually be able to make some money. If you're just following the league, it's really tough to just do that and make money. So I always tell people, approach it with, if you're comfortable with losing it, you'll win a couple, which is nice because, if you spend $20 on a hot dog and beer, you don't get $18 back some of the time. That's just kind of out the door. But in the long run, unless you're really, really in the weeds, it's pretty tough to not have that money leave your account overall. So I always tell people to kind of approach it with that mindset overall.
With the WNBA, I think there's, especially this season, I think it's been turbulent with a lot of injuries. I think a lot of surprise teams.
Yeah.
The rise of the Golden State Valkyries, which I think I didn't see coming, especially being an expansion franchise. So this season, from a betting perspective, what has surprised you? And does that, go positively or negatively, just depending on the flow of the league this season, you think?
That's a great question. I mean, you said it. The biggest surprise is definitely the Valkyries. So when we talk about betting, one of my favorite things to do is bet futures. What futures are is you can bet it during the season, but I love to, at the beginning of the season, you can bet on a team. Like one of the easiest, most straightforward ways is how many games will they win this season? I was slamming every under on the Golden State Valkyries before the season. I was like, expansion team. I looked at that roster and I said, there's not really any stars in a league where there are a lot, like every team has a star because we don't have expansion yet. So you look at the Sparks, they're out of the playoffs. They've got like 3 or 4 stars. It's kind of crazy. But Natalie Nakase has been, absolutely phenomenal, but probably the coach of the year favorite right now. From my eyes, like already a top 3 coach in the W and like with room to grow. Like she really has impressed this first season. Definitely the biggest surprise. But I think the most interesting part of the question that you asked is like, has it been good for betting or bad for betting? And I would say a little bit of both. Part of because like if it's unknowns, I think that can be good. But if it's chaos, that's difficult. And I think some of the chaos part of it that has been difficult is there's 8 new coaches this year. I mean, we only have 13 teams in the league. 8 of them have a new coach this year. So you see a lot of rotations where like Natasha Howard is maybe the ultimate example of this. She'll go from 30 minutes one game to 18 the next to 22 to 34. And if you're trying to bet that, unless you have some knowledge of where it's going to go. Now, trust me, I've looked for the patterns. I've tried to say, does that team have 2 bigs? That team, blah, blah. It can be very challenging with new coaches who are still implementing systems and trying to figure it out. Now, that being said, if you catch on to something because it's so chaotic, that is the type of thing where you might want to keep going back to the well, whatever it may be. Say it's you notice a home road thing that you don't think the books are accounting for. Say it's a rotational thing where it is like when they go against 2 bigs, Shakira Austin plays more minutes, whatever it may be. If you notice things like that, those are the patterns that can be really helpful that seem like, chaos on the surface. And then if you're able to figure it out, that's, to me, the fun of sports betting is trying to solve those little mini problems in front of you.
So how do you factor in international competition like this season compared to last season where there was an Olympic break? This season, you see players going to play international competition, but the WNBA season's still going. And then also, you see a lot of players being waived, players being signed to just emergency contracts. Like, how does that factor in? Because I just feel like with the rosters, you can correct me if I'm wrong, compared to the NBA, it just seems like there's a lot more the roster just seems to be shuffling a lot more into W.
There is a lot of roster churn. You mentioned at the top that, my main job, I do the kind of the content stuff as a fun side thing, but my main job is doing projections. So for that, it's very difficult. It's constant pieces in and out, trying to figure out, like, if sometimes a player will land with a team and play that day, and sometimes a player will land with that team and not play for 3 days. And the WNBA, even though it's on this impressive rise, information is not as easy to get as the NBA. There aren't, like you look at a team like the Knicks, there's like 30 people covering the team. There's connections left, right, and center that have been built over decades or whatever. Sometimes in the WNBA, you look at a team that maybe I'll say the Washington Mystics, because they're a team that is a solid team, have had lots of moving parts. They have a couple of good beat reporters, but it's like if they're just on an off day, it's like you just might not get news. Like, it is such an information gap that, and again, that can cycle into the betting as well. Like, if you have a connection and you're able to do it, I would say, it would actually behoove you maybe to, like, go out and tweet that information and share it, unless you want to bet with it. If you can bet with it, you can do that. But you can there is an information gap enough in the W right now that I think there is room for people who, if they can build connections with teams and share that news. If betting is going to be a thing in the W, information is king in betting. And so if you're sharing that information, people are going to notice, and they're going to find your account, and they're going to be DMing you, and you'll find yourself being a reliable source pretty quickly. So it's definitely different in terms of the amount of coverage and how quickly you learn the news and what you know. And then you talked about some of the international competition. That is a big thing. We also have more games this season than any season past. We're seeing injuries up because of probably those two factors, which then leads to more injury. We saw the Fever just lost 2 of their guards for the season. So there's all sorts of moving parts with the W being what it is. And we saw Unrivaled appear this offseason as a way for folks to stay in the U.S., but it's still playing year round for these players. So there's a lot of wear and tear on a lot of the women in the league. So it can be a challenge to, stay healthy throughout the whole season. And because of that, you see a lot of roster changing. It's a hard cap league, so it makes it really tricky with the dollars and cents of it as well. So there's just a lot of moving parts with the WNBA for sure.
So with the rise of Caitlin Clark, and I realize she's been hurt this season. Last year was her rookie season. Just curious, you mentioned the impact she had just on a interest perspective in terms of betting, but her play on the court, how did that factor into betting as well? I would say from last season to this season before she got hurt, just in terms of the Indiana Fever's roster, completely changing compared to last year, where it's super turbulent in terms of just, but she had no rest. She's new to a league. She's trying to adapt. She's the face of the W now, compared to this season where it's her sophomore season. She has a lot more roster construction underneath her to support her, and then she gets hurt. Can you kind of go over just people betting on her, just like kind of different things? Has she opened up kind of different betting links based on her performance, you think, because of her popularity?
She definitely has opened up, like certain markets. I have seen that they start with Caitlin and then it spreads to the rest of the league. So she definitely gets the most eyeballs. And it's kind of like if people bet the NBA, the Lakers and the Knicks are always the team that you think you're paying a little bit of a heavy price because the public is always on the Lakers and the Knicks. So it's kind of the same thing with Caitlin. You mentioned the Bet She Wins podcast there. The first ever episode we did was called Fade Caitlin Clark, and it was in her WNBA debut. And for the first month or so until the Olympic break, we were able to hit a lot of unders on Caitlin Clark. Because who out there who's, not doing this, for a living wants to bet an under on Caitlin Clark? That's no fun. But if you're able to get on the other side of it, she struggled at first. But to her credit, the second half of last year, she was incredible. And we actually kind of flipped it and we're finding spots to bet on her. Now, this season has been a struggle again, but even this season has been interesting. There's been kind of this debate about her shooting. So she has these really big splits for home and road for this season. I think she's only made like 1-3 on the road all season. It's kind of crazy. But if you look a little bit deeper, those games just so happen to be like when she came back from injury or on like a really tough back to back or something. So it's not maybe this is like the puzzle that I enjoy with sports betting is trying to figure out, is there a reason she's shooting poorly on the road, or is this just noise and it's actually she does better when she has more rest, or she doesn't do well off an injury. So there's all these factors at play. And, with a big player like Caitlin, it's easier to dig into those because there's going to be more information on Caitlin than there is on anyone else in the sport. Yeah, I mentioned the Washington Mystics. I use them as an example of, not having that many people cover. Caitlin's the opposite. Caitlin is going to have all the coverage and all the news out there. So it's a little bit easier to try to dig in. She's going to be a topic of conversation. That point I just shared about, is it the home road or is it the days off? That was, I heard on another podcast, people talking about. So if you listen to podcasts, you'll pick up on, smart folks saying smart things. And then if you're thinking in a betting mindset, you can be like, oh, how can I apply that to my betting personally? And if Caitlin's being talked about the most, you're going to get the most information to work with for her.
A lot of the mainstream media usually say that with Caitlin Clark out from injury, they always like to point out, okay, the league is struggling. They always try to pin the success of the league to Caitlin Clark, where that's not the case, at least from an attendance standpoint or from a television rating standpoint, depending on the market. But from betting perspective, have you seen interest decrease because Caitlin Clark is out for a prolonged amount of time this season, do you think?
It's a really interesting question. I actually haven't looked in. You can reach out to, I can't, but at my company, we have at times reached out to the sports book to say, hey, can you tell what the handle is on this and how much is the sport growing in XYZ? So it would be an interesting question for me to ask them. I agree with the premise though of the league is here pretty much to stay. I think Caitlin being out isn't great. You don't ever want any of your star players to be out. I wouldn't want, Shea to be out in the NBA. I wouldn't want, Nafisa Collier, who just got hurt. It sucks having her out. I do think Caitlin impacts ratings more than most players, but I don't think it's to a dire point of the WNBA is going under because Caitlin Clark is hurt. They still get really strong ratings that are on par with a lot of the professional leagues in the U.S. NFL is always going to be king. NBA has decades worth of establishment. If you look at where the W is in I think it's their 30th season around there, they're doing a lot better than a lot of these leagues did. All these leagues need, star players to push ratings. People love to come back for narratives like that. So I think to that degree, Caitlin is important. But from my perspective, I think the WNBA is going to be in very good shape with Caitlin, and if she's injured, it's not like people are going to shut off the TVs and never pay attention to it again. The league is a very, as someone covering it is a good and somewhat annoying way of being kind of a topic of conversation at all times in ways that I find kind of annoying at times. Not on the league itself, but just the conversation around it gets, kind of muddled and misses the point very often. But to its credit, all those conversations that, maybe lack the nuance that they deserve mean it's on SportsCenter, mean it's in your newsletter that you're reading. I was joking with someone. I was like, when's the last time you got into, a long debate about an MLS thing? It's you kind of need those, even if I really feel for the players and they don't deserve the nasty side of those conversations. It's this weird dichotomy of it drives eyeballs and attention, even if it's super unhealthy for the players themselves at times, which I feel for.
Yeah, no, totally agree. It's certainly an annoying topic among the mainstream media. But I feel I know social media gets a bad rap, and it should, for a lot of negatives. But I think within the WNBA space, just as I follow it, we have so many great journalists who are covering the league. It seems like there's such great information, and there's so much to this league when you follow it. There's just so much to delve into. There's so much great work, and I just believe just a tip to our audience: if you're trying to get into the W, please ignore just the mainstream media and just follow your favorite team and delve into some of the journalists that are out there, covering your favorite team day to day. I think you'll get a lot more enjoyment out of it. Besides,
and also sometimes the algorithm is bad in that it you can be in a little bubble. Find the right bubble and ignore all the noise, because the noise, honestly, unless it's directly impacting your day to day, doesn't have to directly impact. And like you said, there's a lot of really good people covering it. So, scroll through, find one person you like, scroll through who they're retweeting and create your little bubble, and that's fine. You don't have to stress it in this situation.
Exactly. Totally agree. The playoffs are almost approaching. So there's been, as I mentioned, a lot of surprises. So from a betting perspective, I'm looking at the Dream, Mercury, Fever, 3, 4, and 5 in the standings, and then the Storm, at the eighth position. Surprisingly, the Sparks, they're in contention too. The Mystics have risen, and yet we've seen some teams be disappointing, like the Aces, and then you have the Sky Wings and Connecticut Sun. Where do you kind of see this in terms of the favorites heading into the playoffs from a betting perspective? What's catching your eye? Do you think it's just going to be kind of the Lynx and Liberty slugging it out, or do you see kind of these emerging teams making some noise, do you think?
Yeah, I think it is more open than we have seen in seasons past. I mean, even last season to a degree was kind of open. I think that kind of centers around the idea that I have the Liberty aren't bulletproof. They're the reigning champions. They got it done over a Lynx team last year that has improved this year. I mean, the market has them as the two favorites right now. I think that's correct. But I think that the Dream and Mercury are very much in this conversation. The Liberty haven't been able to stay healthy all season. It seems like when they are healthy, they look like a juggernaut. But I don't like if I'm betting today who's going to win the title in 3 months. I don't want to be saying the Liberty are going to be healthy in 3 because we haven't seen it. They've had Jonquil Jones out, then they had Brianna Stewart out, Sabrina could twist out. Like they have not stayed healthy, and it's really hard to go back to back. We saw the Aces did do it, but man, they did it by the skin of their teeth, and then they lost the next year, and they've subsequently have struggled to get there. It's really like we said, like this schedule is a lot more intense. There's a lot more. You're playing year round. It's really hard to go back to back. So if I had to pick a team with no odds today, I would pick the Lynx. But if I were betting on someone, odds included, so that's basically saying like if I bet the $10 on the Lynx, it's gonna return me $20. If I bet $10 on say the Mercury, that's gonna return me $60. If I bet $10 on the Dream, that's gonna return me $100, something like that. I think the Dream are probably the team I want to keep an eye on. They have some options right now in that they have this roster where they start Brianna Jones and Brittany Griner, and they've been doing it all season. But I kind of think Naz Hillman, who has really kind of been one of the more improved players in the league, or again, if you're betting awards, I think that's an interesting bet there. When they have her on the court, their net rating, which is just saying the points scored and points against or whatever fancy way of saying that, is really on par with these top teams, and they're not really being treated like it because as a whole they don't get there over the whole minutes. I think Brittany Griner's minutes are going to shrink as we get to the postseason. We're going to see more of Naz Hillman, and I think the Dream are really alive to make an interesting little run in the playoffs here.
So with Nafisa Collier battling injuries, do you see anybody else sneaking into that MVP debate and kind of taking it? Or do you think if she is back reasonably, even if it's inconsistent, if she just makes a couple of appearances here or there, she's a lock to win this award, do you think?
I lean towards the latter. The timing of this was kind of good for the Lynx. I think they only play like 4 games in the kind of 2-week window that she was originally given for this injury. Her biggest challenger right now is Alyssa Thomas, who also missed a bunch of games at the start of the season. So, if Fee gets up to maybe 8 games missed and we're looking at Alyssa Thomas at like 5, I think the fact that the Lynx are playing as well as they have, the only thing that might kind of hurt her narratively is the Lynx keep winning even without her. So it kind of, if you do the most valuable player by like, oh, their team would fall apart when they aren't playing there. The case is pretty good for Alyssa Thomas. They were really bad when she wasn't playing. They've been outstanding with her, but they're way behind the Lynx in the standings overall. And I think most people watching the sport right now, if you say who's the best player, they're going to say Nafisa Collier. And in basketball, that is very often, you don't overthink it. You just give it to the best basketball player. We see it in the NBA. Jokic wins often. Shea won this year. Shea was the best player on an incredible team. He's the best player on an incredible team. I think she will get it done. And the market, I think, is still that she's a pretty heavy favorite. Every game she misses, it gets a little bit closer. But based on the window that they gave for her originally, I think I would still have her as the favorite to win MVP.
Since you're a veteran of just sports betting in general, I live here in Colorado, and I previously lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So it was a huge difference to see how much sports betting is pretty prevalent here and how easy it is.
Yeah.
So I just want to ask you, the barrier of entry has been greatly lessened, so you just have a lot of new people into it. What do you think in terms of just the industry overall? Do you see as a positive in terms of all the commercials going on, just how easy it is, just how many companies are out there? Just I know there's a lot of this mainstream narrative, so you're in it. So just curious, just from a industry perspective, including the W, what do you make of all these kind of new companies getting into, especially with apps, just the ease to place a bet? Kind of, what's your feeling on that? Is that a positive or negative for your industry?
I think it's a really good question. It's something I think about a lot, to be honest with you, because I do think that, just to be perfectly honest, I think that betting is probably a net negative on society. So you might be like, so why are you in it? There's a couple of reasons. I have, I kind of grinded for like a decade of trying to break into sports, and it just so happened that money pours into the betting side. There's money to be hired for there. So I took the job, and I try to then communicate outwards to other people how they should treat it. They should not look at it as income unless they are, fully willing to do this as a full-time job and have the skills to approach it as such. There's some pretty damning studies out there on kind of the impacts societally from states that have legalized. I always tell people when they ask me about it, I'm like, if they turned back the clock and they said we're going to take this away, I would say, you know what, I totally see where you're coming from. I personally can handle betting responsibly, and I try to share that how to bet responsibly. I try to share. A big thing over at Bet She Wins is if we win money, we give to charity a portion of it. I think that's like really important to give back as well. And then just kind of like approaching it from like a knowledge base of like, if I'm giving out plays that will help people make money, in a space that there is attention, I see that as, hopefully helping people who, if they're going to bet anyways, can bet, can get, on the plus side instead of the negative side. But it's definitely something I think about a lot, because I do think it's something that should be thought about. I think if you're in this industry and you're not being attentive to it and not talking about, some of the definitive cons that come with the pros of, I just crapped all over it. But listen, I love the sports bet. It's fun. I like to have, the thrill of like the puzzle of solving a sport and trying to figure it out. And it makes watching games for me even more fun. So there are definite pros to it, but there are definite cons to it. I think you can't just sweep those under the rug. You have to at least talk about them, acknowledge them, and think about if you're okay with, participating in an industry that has cons that are as notable as the cons to sports betting. And if so, what you're doing to kind of combat that or rationalize it, if you will.
What is your opinion of artificial intelligence as well? So, people that are using AI to get an advantage, is that something that's actually happening or not, do you think, just in sports betting?
I would guess yes, in the sense that I get the feeling that, I mentioned earlier, like if you're a quant trader on Wall Street or whatever, come on over. I think that a lot of those people are coming over, and I think that those people do use AI, but maybe not in the sense of like, make my sports bets for me, more in the terms of like, I'm going to scrape data and I'm going to do it more effectively with AI, and and then they have the skills to, create a model of some sort. So I think AI is being used, but maybe not in the sense of like, Chat GPT, can you tell me who's going to win the game? You know what I mean? Like not super straightforward, but I think in any industry where there's a lot of money, people are going to try to find ways to, like, if there's like big picture data problems, they're going to try and use, artificial intelligence to make that job easier on themselves. So I would guess that's the way it's being used, more so than like a direct one-to-one.
So final question for you. With the league, it's going to be very unpredictable. We have CBA negotiations. We have new teams coming in, a lot of new free agents coming onto the market. What's going to be your offseason? Are you viewing as this being exciting, or are you nervous about what's the future going to be? Because I think it's a unusual but exciting situation that the W finds itself that is very unique compared to other sports. So when, a WNBA champion is crowned, all this stuff's going to happen. Just curious what your perspective is going to be, because I would assume, this time next year is going to be a completely different league in so many ways.
Yeah, it's funny. I've had some people ask me like, man, like last season was like the craziest offseason ever. Will we ever see that again? I'm like, oh man, 2026 offseason is going to say, hold my beer. Cause like it really is basically every single player negotiated their contract. So except for the rookies, so like Paige Beckers and Caitlin Clark will probably stay on the same teams. And these players might stay on the same teams, but everyone else negotiated to end in 2025 because they knew that money was going to be pouring in from the next TV deal. Now that's going to be an exhausting conversation, and you will have to get into our little bubbles, ignore all the noise, because that is going to be miserable to deal with. But if you're the type of person who like loves like a Bleacher Report trade alert type deal, this is going to be your off season. Like we could have 5 of the top 10 players like moving teams in the span of weeks. We could have Asia Wilson in a new team. We could have super teams. We could have, new cities being announced. Like I can't, it's almost like, anything is possible. Anything goes. So I think it's gonna be a really fun postseason. Like we talked about, it seems like there's kind of an opening for this to be a really good postseason with a couple real contenders, even beyond the obvious ones. And then the floodgates open. Then we get to see the CBA negotiations. We get to see all the player movement. We get to see, if the new expansion team is able to, hit the ground running as fast as the Valkyries have. We get to see what the Valkyries are going to do, because I think they'll be a real contender for some of these players. So it's going to be a blast. And then there's going to be an information edge definitely to be had. It's just going to be like, again, is it chaos, or can we see some patterns in all the crazy change that's going on in the W? But it should be fun regardless to see how it all plays out.
No, absolutely. Jim, thank you very much for spending the time. Truly appreciate it. Can you let our audience know where they can find you on social media, where you can find all your content, and anything else you want our audience to be aware of?
Definitely. So the main thing would be to listen to the Buckets WNBA podcast. Actually about to do a recording of that tonight. We basically cover the games, and then I'd always like to do a second half where we kind of do some bigger picture stuff, get rotation of guests there that are all betting experts. So that's pretty good. On Twitter, I'm at Turvey Bets, TurveyBets. Straightforward last name and what I'm doing there. I don't do as many picks on there these days, but if you download the Action Network app, if you do like betting, that's where I put all my picks. So those are kind of the big spots to follow me.
Awesome. Jim, thank you very much. Good luck the rest of the way. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.